On July 20th, 2024, the body of 19-year-old Tom Martinez was found in the quiet suburb of Belmont. He was discovered in the guest room of the Wilson family home. The body lay on the floor next to the bed. Tom's face was frozen in an expression of agony, and a thin silk cord was wrapped around his neck, leaving deep marks of strangulation. The police arrived at the scene after Jessica Wilson, the mother of the homeowner, called 911 upon discovering the young man's lifeless body. Tom Martinez was a sophomore at the local college, studying biology and dreaming of becoming a doctor. He was born and raised in Belmont and was respected by his friends and acquaintances for his kindness and openness. Local residents described him as a polite and responsive young man who had never had any trouble with the law. His relationship with Emily Wilson, a beautiful and intelligent student, seemed perfect at first glance. However, behind the facade of a typical romantic story were more complex and tense relationships than anyone could have imagined. The police immediately began questioning everyone who could shed light on the events of that night. Detective Sloan, an experienced investigator with 20 years of service, led the investigation. His experience told him that the case was not as straightforward as it seemed at first glance. On the surface, it appeared to be a typical crime of passion or a personal conflict. But something was bothering the detective. Too many discrepancies in the witness statements and missing details. The first step was to determine what had happened that ill-fated evening. Emily told the detectives that she and Tom met after class and decided to spend the evening together. They spent a few hours in the living room, talking and laughing. At some point, Tom mentioned that he was feeling tired and would like to stay overnight. Emily offered him the guest room, and they agreed to meet in the morning. She went to her room to sleep around midnight and didn't see Tom again. However, something about Emily's behavior raised doubts in the detective's mind. She seemed too agitated and nervous, answered in short, rehearsed phrases, and avoided direct eye contact. Sloan decided to focus on her relationship with her mother. When asked why her relationship with her mother was strained, Emily just shook her head and didn't go into detail. "It's just minor arguments. Nothing serious," she replied briefly. But there was an underlying anxiety in her voice. Next was Jessica Wilson, Emily's mother. She described her relationship with Tom as friendly but distant. "He was a good boy," she said, "but I didn't know he was staying the night. When I went to bed, I thought he had already gone home." Jessica appeared calm and confident in her words, but her gaze avoided meeting the detective's eyes, and there were notes of nervousness in her voice. Peter Wilson, Emily's father, claimed to know nothing about the events of that night, as he was on a business trip and only returned home the day after the body was found. His testimony seemed to provide no useful information, but Detective Sloan noted it down for the record. The police thoroughly examined the crime scene, but found no signs of forced entry or any evidence indicating the presence of outsiders. The only thing that stood out was the traces of a struggle on the carpet near the bed in the guest room, as well as Jessica's fingerprints on the door handle and around the bed. However, these were not unexpected, since Jessica regularly cleaned the house. Detective Sloan decided to question Emily again, hoping for more cooperation. "Emily, are you sure you don't know anything about what happened that night?" he asked, trying to catch her gaze. Emily clenched her teeth and took a deep breath. I just don't understand who could have done this to Tom," she said, her voice trembling. "Are you sure you don't know?" the detective pressed on. Emily paused for a moment, as if considering something, then suddenly replied sharply, "No, I've already told you everything." This emotional outburst only heightened Sloan's suspicions. He understood that the girl was hiding something but couldn't yet figure out what. To shed light on this mystery, the detective requested a detailed report on Tom and Jessica's relationship. When Tom's phone data was retrieved the next day, a new lead appeared in the investigation. Mysterious messages from Jessica, full of anxiety and despair, as if she feared some inevitable revelation. Now, the police had their first concrete clues, but the motive and the sequence of events remained unclear. Who was truly willing to commit murder out of love, fear, or despair? Jessica, afraid of ruining her family and reputation, or Emily, blinded by betrayal from those closest to her? Detective Sloan realized that the truth might be darker and more tangled than he initially imagined. When the detectives gained access to Tom Martinez's phone, they did not expect to find such crucial evidence. Inside, they discovered an entire thread of messages sent by Jessica Wilson that seemed almost desperate. The content of the correspondence indicated that there was a connection between Jessica and Tom that was much deeper than a mere friendship. It all began with innocent exchanges of pleasantries. Jessica's first messages to Tom were simple and friendly, like, "Thank you for coming to dinner," or "Happy to see you at our house." However, a few weeks later, the tone of the messages changed. They became more personal and emotional. In one of them, Jessica wrote, "You are more to me than just Emily's friend. I don't know how to deal with these feelings." At first, Tom responded evasively, trying to avoid direct answers. But soon his replies became more candid. He wrote, "It's hard for me to talk about this, but I feel something for you too. I don't want this to ruin my relationship with Emily, but I can't pretend it doesn't exist." Over time, the messages became increasingly tense. Elements of anxiety and guilt began to appear. Jessica was clearly tormented by the duality of her feelings. She wrote, "I can't go on like this. It hurts every time I see you with Emily. I can't lie to my daughter anymore." Tom responded, "We have to be honest with her, Jessica. I'm going to talk to Emily. She deserves to know the truth." From that point, the tension in their correspondence only escalated. In the last few days before Tom's death, the messages became even more desperate. Jessica begged Tom not to make any hasty moves. "You don't understand what you're saying. If Emily finds out, it will destroy our family. Please think twice." However, Tom insisted, "I'm tired of living this lie. I will tell her everything tomorrow." These messages became irrefutable proof for the police that Jessica and Tom were involved in a secret relationship that may have led to the tragedy. When Jessica found out that the detectives had gained access to her correspondence, she tried to deny the existence of any affair. "It was just a misunderstanding," she said during questioning. "I was trying to help him understand that he was making a mistake. He was a young, confused boy, and I wanted to support him." But the detectives were not about to let her off the hook so easily. They presented her with the entire correspondence, which clearly hinted at their romantic involvement. Jessica soon realized that hiding the truth no longer made sense. She sighed heavily and lowered her head. "Yes, we had a relationship. It all started with his visits to our house. He was so attentive and caring. I felt alive again when I was around him." She confessed that the relationship began after one of his visits when they accidentally ended up alone in the house. Tom had come to talk about Emily, about how to make her happy, but the conversation quickly shifted to more personal topics. They talked about life, regrets, and unfulfilled dreams, and at some point, something changed. It was like a spark, as if we both realized there was something more, Jessica recalled, with tears in her eyes. Jessica insisted that everything happened very quickly and unexpectedly. "I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop," she admitted. "Every time Tom came over, I felt trapped by my own feelings." However, she claimed she never thought it would go this far. When Tom suggested telling Emily the truth, she was terrified. "I knew it would not only ruin our relationship, but also her life. I couldn't let that happen." But the investigation did not end there. Detective Sloan was certain there was another layer of truth that needed to be uncovered. He asked a question he knew could throw Jessica off balance. "If you were afraid of being exposed, Why did you continue sending messages to Tom, even the day before his death? Jessica did not immediately find an answer to this question. She looked confused and nervous, her hands trembling. I just hoped I could convince him to change his mind, she muttered. I didn't want it to end like this. Jessica's words sounded sincere, but the detectives couldn't help but notice the strange contradictions in her behavior. Why was she so persistent in her warnings to Tom? What made her take such a risk by sending these messages when she knew they could be discovered? And why did she claim to have gone to bed at 10 p.m. when neighbors heard voices in the house much later? Detective Sloan understood that their relationship was the key to solving the murder. He was convinced this was not just a crime of passion, but something more complex and tangled. With each new fact that surfaced, Jessica and Tom's story grew darker. The detectives began to investigate whether Jessica had any other hidden motives, possibly financial or related to her reputation. As Detective Sloan delved deeper into the investigation, he began to suspect that Jessica Wilson had a motive for murder, but something didn't quite add up. If she had truly killed Tom, why would she leave such obvious clues, like the messages and a draft letter, and why did her behavior seem so open? Her testimony sounding more like an explanation than a defense. Detective Sloan felt there was another detail in this story that was still eluding his attention. Sloan decided to take a closer look at the relationships within the Wilson family, particularly between Jessica and her daughter, Emily. At first glance, they seemed like a typical mother-daughter pair, with the usual domestic conflicts common between teenagers and their parents. But the more the detective examined this relationship, the more he sensed the tension that existed between them. Despite her initial statements, Emily continued to behave strangely. She avoided direct answers and often dodged conversations with the police. When Detective Sloan decided to search her room, he found something unexpected. Among her belongings was a hidden diary, its pages filled with small handwriting, full of emotional entries. It was not just a teenager's diary. It was a document filled with suffering and contradictions, revealing the darker sides of her soul. The first pages of the diary contained standard notes about her life, school, and relationships with friends. But then, the entries grew darker. Emily wrote about her jealousy and resentment. I knew something was wrong, one entry read. I saw how they looked at each other, how Mom would start to smile whenever he showed up. I knew this wasn't normal. Further into the diary, more troubling phrases appeared. I won't let them ruin my life, she wrote on one of the pages. If Mom thinks she can just take him away from me, she's wrong. I'll do anything to stop them. The words were written with such force that it seemed as if the ink had been pressed into the paper, as if the hand writing them was trembling with rage. These entries shed new light on the situation. They indicated that Emily was not just a victim of circumstance, but an active participant in this drama. She had known about her mother's affair with Tom long before the murder took place. And moreover, she had her own plans for how to deal with the situation. Detective Sloan knew it was time to question Emily again. Putting together all the evidence they had found, he realized that her relationship with her mother could be far more complicated than it appeared at first glance. Emily was summoned to the station for further questioning, and her reaction to the discovered diary turned out to be crucial. Emily was visibly shocked when she was shown the pages from her own diary. She tried to defend herself, claiming that they were just entries to vent her emotions. I was angry, yes, but I would never have done something like that, she said, her voice trembling, her eyes brimming with tears. But Detective Sloan couldn't help but notice that her answers were becoming increasingly incoherent. When the detective asked why she had reacted so jealously to her mother's relationship with Tom, she changed her tone. I loved him, she said. lowering her eyes. I knew he was cheating on me with my own mother. It hurt so much. I couldn't bear it. With each of the detective's questions, it became increasingly clear that the true motives and events of that night were far more complex and tangled than initially imagined. The truth was slowly beginning to surface. Emily was brought to the station for further questioning. Under the pressure of the accumulated evidence and the discovered entries in her diary, the atmosphere in the room grew tense. Detective Sloan and his partner, Detective Clark, knew that this was a critical moment in the investigation. Emily seemed on the verge of breaking down. Her face was pale, and her hands were noticeably trembling. She was still trying to maintain her composure, but her eyes betrayed her fear and internal struggle. The detectives noted the change in Emily's behavior from the very beginning of the conversation. She looked exhausted, and her answers grew increasingly evasive, as if she were trying to hold on to a fragile edge. Sloan and Clark realized that this was a manifestation of her guilt and fear of what might come to light. As the detectives analyzed the situation, they recalled the draft of a letter found in Tom's room, which he had intended to send to Emily. In this letter, Tom apologized for hiding the truth about his affair with Jessica, her mother. He wrote that he could no longer live with the burden of this lie and wanted to finally reveal the whole truth to free himself from the guilt. The letter was unfinished, but its tone and content indicated Tom's determination to put an end to the secret that had been tormenting them. These details led Sloan to a crucial realization. If Emily knew about the letter or Tom's intentions to reveal the truth, her motives for murder would become much clearer. The growing tension between mother and daughter in recent months only heightened the suspicion that Emily might have felt extreme jealousy and a sense of betrayal. She had seen her mother and Tom exchanging looks. Their relationship had become increasingly strained and convoluted. All this added an additional burden to her young psyche, and at some point, Emily probably could not bear it any longer. Shortly after Emily learned that Tom was planning to reveal the truth, her behavior changed. The detectives discovered that on the night before the murder, Emily had trouble sleeping. She left her room to eavesdrop on a conversation in the guest room and found out that Tom truly intended to tell her everything. Realizing that this information would destroy her life, she felt cornered. Emily could not allow her world to collapse and could not bear the shame that would befall her and her family if the truth came out. Her jealousy and pain turned into anger and determination to stop Tom at any cost. When Tom was left alone in the guest room, she entered, hoping to persuade him to keep their secret. However, Tom refused, insisting that he had to tell Emily the truth to free them all from this horrifying secret burden. In despair, Emily realized she had no other option. She saw a thin silk cord on the table, lying among Tom's things, and impulsively grabbed it. Driven by anger and fear, she resorted to extreme measures. Her hands trembled as she quickly wrapped the cord around Tom's neck, giving him no chance to scream or defend himself. Her decision was sudden and unexpected, even to herself. By the time she realized what had happened, it was already too late. All the evidence had been pieced together, and the events of that night became crystal clear to the detectives. Emily Wilson was at the center of this tragedy, and her motives now seemed more than convincing. She stood before the investigation as the main suspect in Tom Martinez's murder, her actions driven by jealousy, fear, and desperation. What began as an innocent affair between a mother and her daughter's boyfriend turned into a deadly trap for everyone involved in this drama. Emily could not cope with the discovery of the secret relationship between her mother, Jessica, and Tom, who was not just a beloved person to her, but the center of her world. She saw in him her support, her future, and when she realized their relationship was rooted in lies and betrayal, her world literally collapsed. She felt betrayed not only by Tom, but also by her own mother, the person she trusted most. Emily's psychological instability deepened when she realized Tom was planning to reveal the truth, which meant the complete destruction of her illusions and the beginning of a new stage of shame and humiliation. She could not bear the thought and could not allow her life to become a subject of gossip and condemnation by those around her. Her fear of losing face in front of society, her friends, and even herself outweighed any common sense. The trial became yet another ordeal for everyone involved in the tragedy. Emily was charged with premeditated murder, and her lawyers tried to build a defense based on her youth, emotional instability, and inability to control her actions in a state of shock. However, the evidence was too compelling. The diary found in her room, Tom's correspondence with Jessica, the draft of his letter, and the testimonies of neighbors and others who knew her family. At the trial, Emily tried to explain her actions as a result of madness and a temporary loss of control. But the jury was not inclined to be sympathetic. For many, this case served as a vivid example of how jealousy and hatred can take over even the youngest and seemingly innocent souls. Emily was found guilty of premeditated murder, and the court sentenced her to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole no earlier than 15 years. For Jessica Wilson, everything also changed forever. Her secret affair with Tom became known throughout the town, and she lost not only respect and trust, but also her family. Her attempts to explain her behavior only worsened her situation. Many in town considered her the cause of the entire tragedy, blaming her frivolity and moral weakness for the terrible consequences. She decided to leave town and start a new life elsewhere, far from a past that had become too painful. Emily's father, Peter Wilson, who initially tried to support both his wife and daughter, eventually couldn't bear the pressure. He filed for divorce and left, abandoning Belmont forever. The broken Wilson family became a symbol of the consequences of human weakness, mistakes, and the inability to resist their passions and desires. Now, the Wilson family home, once filled with laughter and joy, stood empty and abandoned, serving as a grim reminder of how a single mistake can change the fate of several people and mark the beginning of the end. Thank you for watching the video till the end. More gripping stories about real crimes await you on our channel. Subscribe so you don't miss new episodes.